Good evening, everyone. If we can get going. Welcome to the City of Evanston Plan Commission meeting of Wednesday, October 10th, 2018. The first thing to do is to determine if we have a quorum. Can you please call the roll?
Sure.
Ms. Jones.
Commissioner Draper? Commissioner Dubin? Commissioner Goddard? Here. Commissioner Halleck? Commissioner Isaac?
Here.
Commissioner Pagotzi? And Chair Lewis?
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, so we have a quorum. So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of, well, we have two sets of minutes. I guess we'll go through them one at a time. The first is the meeting of August 8th, 2018 of the Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. Are there any revisions, questions, comments, amendments to the minutes? So I might have one. Did I actually second my own nomination as or was I asking for someone to second
I
it?
think you were asking for someone to second.
All right,
We
can we have
double
the
check on that one. Yeah.
record reflect that? All right, is there a motion to approve? Mr. Pagotzi?
Second?
Commissioner Goddard. All in favor? Aye. Aye. All against? All right, so the second is the minutes of, where are they? Oh, the minutes of the June 13th meeting of the 2018 meeting of the Plan Commission only. Are there any comments, revisions, questions, clarifications? I actually think I had one also. Let's see. I believe on page 4 of 5 there was a sentence that read, Chair Lewis then asked if there were any questions from staff. I believe I was asking if there were any questions of the staff or from the commissioners. So if it can be modified to do that. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Commissioner Goddard. There we go. Okay, so all in favor? Aye. All against? All right. Unanimous. All right. So the first item on the agenda is, let me see if I can get to where I should be, is a major adjustment to a plan development at 1571 Maple Avenue, number 18 PLND-0082. So a little bit of comment about the proceedings today. We will run through first a presentation by staff of what the petition is, and then we will ask the petitioner to present their case, and then at that point we will open it up to members of the public to ask questions either of staff or of the petitioners. Now that's questions, not statements. At that point, we will let the either respond and let's see, and then we will give a chance for the petitioner, if they have any questions back, they can ask those, and at that point we will close the public hearing and go to the deliberation of the commissioners. So, Ms. Jones, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Megan Jones, Neighborhood and Land Use Planner. I am going to pretty quickly give a background on the project as well as go over what the request this evening is. 1571 Maple, that plan development was actually approved in April of 2015. It has been constructed. It received a final certificate of occupancy in April of this year, but a temporary certificate of occupancy was received in July of 2017, which enabled residents to begin to move into that building. There are 101 total dwelling units, and there are a total of 113 parking spaces. This includes 12 parking spaces on site in a lot that is off of Maple. At the time that this project was approved, the required parking spaces were 142, but as a condition of the approval, council added requirement of a lease with the city for 101 parking spaces in the Maple Avenue garage. So total, the provided parking spaces work out to a ratio of 1.12 parking spaces per unit, or 0.75 parking spaces per bedroom. So the formal request from the applicant is a major adjustment to this plan development to modify the existing parking lease from 101 parking spaces in the Maple Avenue garage to 50 parking spaces within either the Maple Avenue or the Sherman Avenue garages, as those spaces are available. They are also requesting a reduction in the on-site affordable units from 2 units at 100% of area median income, or AMI, to 1 unit at 50% of area median income. This has actually been modified from the initial application, which initially said 60% of AMI. And also, I do want to note that per our legal department, this particular item is not under the Plan Commission's review jurisdiction. So the information that was in the packet is essentially for your information. So we'll focus the discussion this evening on the parking aspect. And I also want to point out that there are no physical changes to the constructed building. So this chart outlines what's existing, what's required, what's requested, and what is recommended. So I'll go through this a little bit slowly. We can go back to it if it's a little bit more confusing. As I mentioned before, there are 113 parking spaces existing, which includes the 12 on-site parking spaces and the 101 leased parking spaces in the Maple Avenue garage. The total required parking per our current zoning ordinance is 83 parking spaces. The requested amendment is for a total of 62 parking spaces, so 50 leased parking spaces and then the 12 on-site parking spaces. Staff's and the DAPR committee's recommendation was for a total of 82 parking spaces, or 70 leased parking spaces in the garages and those 12 existing on-site parking spaces. So the standards for adjustments to plan developments, this particular proposed adjustment would have to maintain the plan development satisfaction of the standards listed here, which have been addressed in the staff report. These are section 63510, or standards for special uses, section 6369, or standards for plan developments, and section 611110, and standards and guidelines for plan developments in the D3 Downtown Core Development District. So I have these listed here. I can go through them individually, or we can wait until we're at the deliberation phase.
Why don't we wait until
Okay. Okay. I will do that. I do want to point out that since this building has already been constructed, a good number of these particular standards are not applicable for this particular application because they deal with the actual structure themselves. But we will address that more when we go into deliberation. So all that being said, staff recommends that the Plan Commission make a positive recommendation to the City Council for the approval of the major adjustment to the plan development at 1571 Maple Avenue to modify the parking lease condition of approval Z from 101 parking spaces to 70 parking spaces available within either the Maple Avenue or Sherman Avenue garages. So with that, I open it up to any questions.
I think we'll hold off on the questions until after the presentation. So we'll now move to the petitioner's presentation. So please, when you come up, state your name and your position, your relationship to this project, if you can.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Commissioner and members of the board. My name is John McLinden. I'm a managing partner of Hubbard Street Group, one of the developers of this project, and we still own the project. And I'd like to present tonight, the reason that we're here and requesting this amendment. First of all, it was something which we talked about originally when we got passed by the City Council a couple of years ago, that there was a very good chance that what we had predicted would come true, and if so, we would come back to this commission, and that's why we're here tonight. But I'd like to start off by, I think, just thanking the city and really commending the city and the whole team of staff and this plan commission, although many of you weren't there 3 years ago, and city council for very successful development. This was the first project in the city of Evanston, and there was a lot of consternation at that time to do your so-called TOD project. The city and staff wanted very much to do something which was progressive leaning in terms of eliminating or reducing the number of cars in a project. This seemed to be the correct project to do so. My company has developed over 8 TOD projects in downtown Chicago and some surrounding suburbs, and we had a lot of experience with it. And so when we looked at this site, and we thought that it would be a very good candidate for that. Staff was very receptive to it, and that's why we crafted, if you will, a number of unusual provisions at that time. Nonetheless, again, going back in history, what happened was that there was a number of residents from the surrounding area that were concerned that if we had a reduced parking number, that people would be parking all over the streets, and that our residents would be taking parking spaces which were available to, at this point in time, to the residents. And so we look back in history now, and as far as I know, in talking with the alderman, there hasn't been a single complaint about any of our residents parking on the streets. We agreed to a provision that we could not park on the streets, and I think that the city has a requirement that if someone does park, they have to have a special certificate or a card, and our residents aren't allowed to even have one of those. And so what's happened is that the project was very successful. We leased it up very quickly, even though I think there were some people at the time who were concerned, how will you be able to lease it up if you don't have a lot of on-site parking? Anybody who's going to be paying these kind of rents is going to require it. But the end result is that wasn't the case. It's a very successful project. We gave a number which we're required to report and certify to the city annually, and that was on May of this year. We started leasing June of last year, so it was the first full year, and there were 47 or 46 parkers or cars for this project, substantially below what was projected, or was feared, I should say, by some people. Now, the data that we had showed that that wasn't ever going to be a concern, but now we have the proof and we have the data to prove it up. And one of the reasons is that we designed this project, again, along with staff and this commission and the city, so that it would be very progressive in terms of its use of transportation-oriented development standards. For example, we have an electric car station on site. We allow parking for area, businesses and residents during the day. We have shared parking cars on site. site that get utilized, quite a bit. Matter of fact, I was there tonight, and both of them were out. And we are adjacent to the major transportation hub of the city, which was for both CTA as well as as Metra and all the bus lines. We put a Divvy bikes right outside. And so we did a lot of things, and again, in conjunction with staff that said, let's promote this. Let's be proud of the fact that we're going to try to reduce cars. But at the same time, the city was concerned and said, listen, we have a lot of residents which are complaining that their parking spaces are going to be taken away. We're going to, at least when we pass this in ordinance, we're going to still require you to have these extraordinary number of parking spaces off-site, which was 100 parking spaces, and then we had 12 on-site. We then presented a paper, which was one of the parking experts considered an authority in transportation-oriented developments. It's called CNT, and they opined at the same time that their experience was similar to ours. Our experience, again, having developed 8 of these in and around Chicago area, that the number would probably be based upon the data that we had. Again, small units, a lot of single residents in our parking, adjacent to transportation, nodes, that we would have a demand of about 25 to 50% of units, and that's exactly where we are. The CNT report, again, these are the experts, and we presented that in our findings at the time. I'd like to read you just a couple of their findings, which have also proven out to be absolutely correct. One, they said that fewer than half the downtown residents of Evanston drive to work. Very interesting stat. You won't see that in a lot of suburbs, but that's a very interesting stat. They said that our project, 1571 Maple Street, is aimed at the market segment that would live in downtown Evanston without cars. Again, if someone needed a car every day for work, most likely they're not going to rent at our project. There's a lot of other projects to rent at, because if they had to walk, it only takes 5 minutes to walk to the parking lot, but if you had to do that every day in inclement weather, you probably would say, geez, there are other projects I want to live at. So it's a bit self-selected, is what their point was, and we made that same point. It's self-selected why you live here. That the Maple project, our project, is served by both Metra CTA lines, 8 CTA and PACE buses. There's a train arriving every 14 minutes, et cetera, et cetera. So transportation here is exceptional and is better than any other place in the city. They also had another finding which I thought was very important, and that is the census data that they had on this particular area, that 4 out of 10 rental households near Davis Street already live without a car. And again, it's rental, not owners, but we are a rental project. So from ownership to then to rental, the number even drops down further. Okay, and then they went on to say that as you have smaller units, and we were targeting, remember, to a smaller unit population. We have a lot of 1-bedrooms, we have some studios, we do have some 2s and 3s, but as a percentage, we are orienting ourselves. Our target market was a smaller unit. Then on 1-person households, 75% of the people are car-free. Okay, again, we had cited that same data, and that's another reason that, again, the data has proven out. And then finally, if you're under 35 years old, the car ownership rates are substantially less, and they have data to back that up. So for a whole bunch of reasons, our target market, what we did for the project, where we're located, all were predictions by them and us that we weren't going to need anywhere near the 112 parking spaces. And now we have the data. The data is that we've been there for a year, that our project was fully leased, that we only needed 47 units. This was as of June. As of today, that number is under 40 parking spaces, and we've had our first rollover in tenancy. In other words, a lot of our projects, people were there for a year, and we have tenants moving out. We now are under 40. That's as of the number last month. So we see that not only did we the data is there. It's not as if we have to guess anymore. We don't have to be fearful. We've not had any concerns. There hasn't been any reports that we've heard of any complaints that there's not parking for residents on the street. And it's worked out very well. And that's why, again, it's a success, which is something which we should all be very proud of. We had, now I know that the request was for 50 spaces. The fact of the matter is we provided a cushion, and maybe we'll even be back here next year or the year after if the data continues to migrate in the direction that it's going. We provided a cushion when we said, we were originally talking with staff and said, what do we think we need? And we said a cushion would be 50 spaces. Again, 50 on site, as you noted. The other 12, that's 62 spaces. Right now we have less than 40 in terms of cars at our project, our 101-unit project. We already have a 50% cushion. So the question is, what's a decent cushion? I think that's more than enough. And it's also a burden on us, to have to pay for vacant spaces that are over in, the city lot. And this was never meant to be an end around where the city was going to get extra revenue, as a secret tax. Matter of fact, the former administrators had said that this is not the issue. The issue is simply to make sure that the residents who are concerned are taken care of until we have the data. So with that, I'll end my presentation, but I'll be available for questions if there are any. Thank you.
So is that the complete presentation? Is anyone else going to speak, or is that?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay.
We're all available for questions, so.
All right, very good. All right, so I think at this point I will, is there a list of people who are going to speak? Is it out there? We'll get to that, yes, yeah. Did you sign up? Okay, very good. We're just getting the list, so. All right, so we're going to open this up to, at this moment, to questions. Questions of either staff or the petitioner by the public, all right? So at this time, would Alan Grath of 1640 Maple like to speak? All right, that's a good point.
What's the point?
So I need to swear everyone in, including yourself. Anyone who is going to speak, do you promise to tell the truth?
Sure.
That's a yes?
That's a yes.
All right, very good. Thank you, yeah.
I'm Alan Gratch, and my wife and I have lived in Evanston since 1967, which makes that 51 years. And we're very concerned about planned unit developments, especially modifications to them subsequent to their initial approval.
So is this going to be a question?
And I do have three questions that I would ask the applicant to answer and for the board to consider. Why aren't the requested major modifications to the approved plan constitute an abandonment of the original plan? And if they are an abandonment of the original plan, then I would suggest that this has to be reconsidered as a fresh plan. Second question. To what extent is there evidence that the requested change represents a reasonably unforeseeable change of circumstance? It sounds to me like all this was considered in the original plan, and the bargain between the applicant and the city with regard to the PUD established the number of parking units that were originally required, I think 101. And then with regard to that, has the staff investigated the history of the applicant in terms of requesting for a plan and the subsequently requesting major modifications of that plan, And thirdly, to what extent does the city benefit from the cost savings that are obvious that come out of reducing the parking spaces by 50? Thank you.
All right, so sometimes I just have everyone ask their questions and then we go through them, but I think this is going to be small enough that I'd like to go directly to these. So the first question about the original plan, is that more to staff or?
I think that would probably be more to staff than the applicant. And the zoning code does allow for minor adjustments and major adjustments to the plan development. And as a point of comparison, even if we were to completely restart the plan development process, it would essentially be the same as what we're doing now. There would be a design and project review committee review, which has happened, plan commission review, which we are in the midst of, and then it would go on to council for their review. So the review processes are essentially the same.
Except for the city, except for the citizen input with regard to the PUD.
It's still the same.
I think you're giving your input at this point, so.
This is considered
So it's
the,
two topic, though.
right, this is considered the public hearing for this major adjustment, during which we take testimony and answer questions from the public for this particular project. The DAPR committee meetings are also open to the public, as are the city council meetings, which you would be able to attend, as well as those are open meetings. So it's still the same amount of opportunity for comments from the public, if that's the main concern. And again, as I mentioned before, the zoning code does allow for both minor adjustments and major adjustments to a plan development as they may be needed. So.
All right, yeah, and I believe that this is defined, in Article 6-3-6-12, adjustments to plan development, so it is outlined. Question number 2 is evidence of reasonable change of quantities. How, maybe you can rephrase it, but I think this is directly to the petitioner.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. My name is Michael McLean. I'm also one of the partners in this project. I actually handled most of the entitlement process on a day-to-day basis during the initial entitlement. I'm also a resident of Evanston. In fact, I would actually say to that question, it was reasonably predicted that we wouldn't need these spots. It was actually quite some evidence was actually submitted that we wouldn't need these parking spots, and it was a solution to the fears of the neighborhood to make sure that there was a fallback in case we were wrong. And people are wrong, a decent amount of time with major decisions that take many years to come to fruition. So there are good examples of this actually being having some precedent in Evanston. For example, E2, which was made to build a tremendously large parking garage, which they then couldn't lease to their tenants, and actually got a relief, I believe, to turn that into public parking, which added to more public parking adjacent to the Maple Avenue parking garage, which was 50% utilized at the time. So through this process, we were able to avoid building infrastructure and impact to the streets and the neighborhood by avoiding a giant bunker of a parking garage, just like the one Evanston building, which is next to us, which killed the Maple Avenue retail street when they did that, and also the presence on Emerson. We were able to reduce the scale of this building. We were able to reduce that infrastructure and provide housing for people who did not want to own cars and live in downtown Evanston. And we foresaw that we would not need this. We also foresaw the need to protect the residents surrounding this that were concerned about this unproven method of development in Evanston. So it truly was foreseen. And that's really why we're here requesting this consideration, because Evanston really broke the mold and got national attention for this project. And we want to, we're asking to continue to do so, to continue to embrace it.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I think the third question could go to either, even though the Mr. Grath asked of staff, but I think either could talk to the history of asking for requests, how to respond to that. So I think if you would like to make a statement.
Quite simply, there's no history of us asking for something and then abandoning it, period.
Okay. All right, and the fourth question is how the city might profit, and I think this is to staff, from a reduction in the amount of parking spaces required.
I don't know if we would profit, but it would be a case where spaces are actually being used. If we have spaces within the garage that are leased and are being essentially held for a particular building or use, and that they aren't actually being used, and that's taking up spaces for other visitors or other residents that may need to come in and use those spaces. So it's more an issue of available use.
So my understanding is actually reducing the amount of required spaces, since this is being leased by, since they are leasing space from the city, is the city will lose revenue by granting this request. Is that correct? Because there will not be as many spaces leased in their parking space, so it's negative impetus for them to do it. So I think that's basically, is that correct?
I don't know if they could alternatively lease them to someone else, so it's only correct in the absence of additional information. But I would like to, if you're done on that point, I'd like to make another point. I made a little bit earlier, but I'd like to reemphasize it, is that the intention here was never for this to be another quote-unquote source of revenue for the city. The whole point of it was to satisfy certain neighbors, and it was a political consideration. We were asked to just accept it. We'll talk about it in a year from now. It's not, this is once we have the data. But right now we don't have the data, and we're not going to be able to pass it. But I would like to make one further point, just so you understand the burden that is upon a developer by imposing this. It doesn't sound like much, but it is. As we go now, we've developed the property in the next year or so, we either will sell or refinance it. So I'm going to give you a little developer talk and just for a moment. But these spaces are costing about $1,500 a month, and they're vacant, they're not using them, we don't need them. And when you have that, it's $1,400 a year. Now, if my project is valued, and this is where the market values a project, a quality project like this, at a 5% cap rate, that's a little short of $30,000 per space. That's $30,000 less that I can either sell my project for or get a loan for some percentage of that. And if it's 30 spaces, that's $900,000. So it doesn't sound like much, I think, but it's an incredible burden upon us as we now look to, at some point in time over the next 2 or 3 years, of exiting this project. Thank you.
All right, so the next person who's asked to talk is Edward Williams. Please, if you can come in and state your name and...
I swear.
Okay. Okay.
Edward Williams, and I live in the 1500 block of Elmwood. I do have a question before I make my comments. The chart showed that there were 12 spaces. If I recall, when I counted the spaces out, I counted 11. Are there 11 or 12 spaces? It's 13. There are 13, including the 2 rental spaces, which are reserved for the rental car. Otherwise, there are 11 spaces available for the public. Is that correct? Correct. Okay, thank you. 11 spaces, not 12.
So this is the time for questions, by the way,
Okay.
not public
Not
comments.
my comment yet?
You
Okay.
you can make comments later, yes.
Okay, that was my question.
Okay.
There are 11 spaces rather than 12 then. Thank you.
All right. Lastly but not leastly, Julie Rosen? Yes. Okay.
I guess I swear to be truthful in whatever you had said earlier.
You've already done all
Oh, great,
that, so
okay.
don't worry about it.
Thank you for hosting the meeting. I guess I have a couple questions. I know that we had some wonderful data that was presented, and I'm kind of a data junkie. But I guess I'm wondering, do we have information about where people are parking other than those spots? I live right next door at 1570 Elmwood, and we have renters putting up flyers in our building to rent in our building. And I'm just curious if we're comparing apples to apples with the number of cars. Obviously, you track who are in those spots, but again, apples to apples, do people have cars? And I guess the second question would be, are there spots available for monthly parking at Sherman Avenue? A year ago, we actually redid our garage, and we needed to park 100 cars in the Sherman Avenue, and there were no spots available. We all walked to the parking garage where these particular spots in question are, and it is a little more than a 5-minute walk. So those are my two questions. Just, are we comparing apples to apples, and are there spots available, or are they just kind of in number?
All right. I am not sure who would answer the apples to apples flyers in the neighboring one, but the Sherman Avenue Sherman Plaza, is that have available spaces to rent, and are there enough to still keep it a public, I think to add to that, a public parking garage available for the businesses downtown if there were rented spaces?
Yeah, I would have to double check on the exact numbers with our parking revenue manager. But I do know initially that was a concern when the project was approved, was the availability of parking spaces, and that typically is one of the garages that has a lot of traffic in it, which is also why the recommendation speaks to having both of those garages, and it's basically Maple Avenue or Sherman garage that spaces are available, because we know Sherman Avenue, that particular garage is used pretty heavily. But I don't know the exact number.
At the DAPR meeting, my name is Bernard Citron, I represent all these guys. At the DAPR meeting, that question was asked to the parking, if I'm correct in my memory, that question was asked to the parking revenue coordinator, or what, I apologize for not knowing her. And what she said was very clearly, at the time this project initially came through, Sherman was too filled. There was too much use of it. They raised the price on Sherman, and market changed, and that there were spaces available. Now, maybe all 50 can't go to Sherman. That she wasn't clear that we could put all 50 that we're asking for in Sherman, but that spaces were now available in Sherman, and that was a change in circumstance from the time this project came through. So that's what I remember her testimony. I don't know if it's called testimony at DAPR was, but we got two staff members here who can either confirm that I'm telling the truth or not. But she did seem to say that, she did say that circumstances have changed since this project came through and since we entered into the parking lease, and that spaces are available. We're just seeking that if people want to be able to go to Sherman, that they have the ability to do so until such time as staff, the parking revenue coordinator says, nope, that's too many. And at that point, they would have to go to Maple.
Yeah. So I wanted to clarify that point as well, is that right now we are banned from parking in Sherman. The PD says you must only park in Maple. All we're asking is for the opportunity to be considered to park in Sherman. And again, the parking revenue coordinator who gives out those monthly passes can say, sorry, we're full, we can't take any, but if there is a big exit for whatever reason, or spaces come up, that we are considered along with anybody else on an even basis. I wasn't really clear on the apples to apples question, but
So, all right, so if you,
I guess I'm wondering, when we looked at...
can you please come up to the, yeah, it's just for the recording.
No, that's okay. I guess I know that you cited some numbers with people who have cars and are utilizing the parking space. Do you have any information on people who have chosen because they don't want to go to the Maple parking lot and have cars? I guess I just wanted to know if the 47 spots that, I think it was 47 you mentioned, we were comparing just your own data of parkers versus total number of cars in the building.
Yeah, the total number of cars in the building is 47. That was as of that May date. And the total number of cars that as of that date were parking in the garage were 47. Our leases, and this is another requirement that the city had, just so everybody's clear on it, requires in the lease that someone designate if they have a car, and if they have a car, they have to rent a spot at Sherman, and we charge them for it. So,
Can I ask a clarification?
Please, because if you don't, I was going to.
I guess so then if someone could potentially be parking in our building, they might be paying double. They're already charged to park in Sherman and would then pay privately above and beyond that for a spot. I know for a fact we have at least one person who's parking in the building, so I'm just trying to compare apples to apples.
I don't doubt what she's saying. It's possible. We're just not aware of it.
All right.
No, and to add to that, I'm thinking back to the TOD parking study. We do have the ability to get information from the Secretary of State that is not always 100% accurate, but that gives more information on who owns vehicles and what that address is. So that could give more general information about who owns cars and where they actually are. That could give a broader amount of information than self-reporting, because that's information that we have to have in order to do the wheel tax and make sure we get that information in. With this development being a little bit newer, I'm not positive that that would have been on the most recent report, but that's more information that we can have once it's been in place for a little bit longer.
I'm going to step out on a limb and tell you what was said. This goes back 3 years ago. The fact of the matter is, what you don't want, and there's really one issue, and we shouldn't get mixed up on all this red herring, is there one issue was the residents in the city didn't want a lot of our people, our 100-unit building, to be parking all over the streets at night. That is not happening. We can be all assured of that. And we really shouldn't get tied up in whether or not one resident is parking next door. God, this is a free world. What we should do, quite frankly, is eliminate the parking requirement totally and let people park where they want, meaning they're not going to park on the streets, as long as you don't park on the streets because you can't get a permit. But if you want to park next door and there's some resident who has an empty parking spot and he wants to make $120 a month, God love them. Let them do that. If the city wants them to park in Sherman Avenue, if Sherman Avenue has high demand, what they should do is what they did do, which was reported to the city. They raised the prices on Sherman to $125, and Davis it was $115, and it shifted. Now there's vacant spaces on Sherman. If someone wants to cut a deal with the YMC and park there at night because a lot is vacant, let them do it, as long as they're not parking on the street. Anyway, thank you.
All right, Mr. McLendon, just to be clear, you're not changing your...
No, I'm not changing my request.
Okay.
I am telling you, though, that a year from now, if the data stays the same or even gets progressively, less cars, we'll probably be back here and talking again.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I think the list is very short. So why don't we go in the same order if people would like to make a statement? So, Mr. Gretsch. Oh, questions from, excuse me, let's do that. So are there questions from the commissioners at this point of the petitioner or staff? I have a question. Is the neighborhood surrounding this area, does it have stickers? Is it controlled by parking stickers? Is it zone A, B, whatever? So there's really no way to know if residents here are parking on the street or not? Well, no, I mean, there's the neighborhood. I mean,
if someone owns a vehicle, just in general, they would need to get the wheel tax. So that's why we get the Secretary of State information. With regards to the on-street parking permits, I'd have
Yeah.
to check to see what's nearby. Off the top of my head, I can't think of what zones would be very close to this particular project, though.
okay. All right. So I also have a question. How many of the on-site, either 11 or 11 spaces are actually leased to residents, and how many are available? I think if I remember, because I was old enough to go back to this, some of these were on for people to drop off their groceries and things like that. They were open spaces. How many are actually leased on the property? Zero. Okay.
So that parking is open to the public for retail, stores on Maple and Davis during the day, but no residents are leasing the on-site overnight parking. And it's 13 spaces, with 2 of them with the Haven share cars.
Okay. Commissioner Goddard? Commissioner Isaac?
I have a question for staff. Presuming that we recommend that the parking space requirement gets approved, and City Council then turns around and agrees and enacts an ordinance reducing the required number of spaces. Do we know at all whether the city is willing to amend the lease that they executed with the applicant that runs for 7 years and requires them to lease 101 parking spaces?
And Scott might be able to answer a little bit more, but for this particular ordinance, that would essentially have to be kind of tied together. And I think discussions probably started a little bit higher up before they got down to staff to work on the details of this particular report, but that would have to be part of the full process.
Yeah, we would suggest that the lease either go, at the same meeting with the city council, or immediately thereafter, to amend that if that was the direction of the city council.
All right. Is that it for questions? Commissioner Draper.
What is the occupancy of the building?
With the exception of the 2 affordable units that we have not been able to lease, it's 100% full. And it did so in less than 9 months.
Okay. Okay. And then just to clarify the earlier numbers, so it was that there was 12 on site and 101 leased?
So there's 13 on site.
Yeah.
However, 2 are reserved for Haven Car Share, which is a zero membership fee to our residents' car share. So it's actually used very, very often. And then 11 spaces that are open to the public. And then 101 leased spaces, of which 40 are currently leased, and the rest are vacant.
Okay. So then what you were proposing is that you would have 50 total, which would be subtracting out the 13?
No, the 13 are not in our request.
Okay.
It's just the parking garage that we're addressing here.
Okay.
So it would actually be 63. 50 spaces in the garage plus the parking lot.
Plus the 13 equals 63 spaces. All right. Commissioner Bogozzi.
I just had one question. Is the leased parking space offered to the tenant, do they have to pay an additional sum for that? So the cost of that lease is passed on to the tenant who chooses, hey, I'll take advantage of leasing that space over on Maple?
Yes, so it's not that they take advantage of it. If they want to live in the building and want a car in Evanston, they must lease that space. And it's a direct pass-through. And the cost actually, when we made this agreement, it was $85 a month.
Okay.
It's now, I think, $115 a month. We have no control over that escalation, and we don't profit off of the lease of the space.
So you're claiming to have comparable rates to adjacent garages, or?
The city lots are the lowest price in the market. I mean,
So you just pass through the cost?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Who is that?
Excuse me. How would you know if I came to you and wanted to rent an apartment? How would you know if I had a car or didn't have a car? For example, if I said no, I don't have a car, but I really did, and I was parking on the street, couldn't that happen?
Yes, it could happen. And listen, it's just like anything else in life. Some people can lie, and some people could get away with it, but we're not aware of it. And I think our management, I even asked that question, anticipating something like this. I said, are you aware of anybody? And the managers, not that they know everything, they said they weren't aware of it either. So, but it could happen, of course.
I'm not sure it would solve, however many were mandated spaces, I don't think it would solve that problem anyway. So, yeah.
I mean, we could also be active citizens and not lease our own vacant car spaces to other tenants, if they don't want them parking in that adjacent area. I mean, if a condominium is experiencing low parking rates because people are giving up their cars and trying to make money off of ParkX or Spot Hero or just somebody in the neighborhood, they could say, no, we won't do this. You must go park in Maple Avenue, and actually walk into the management office and say, hey, so-and-so says they has a car, wants to rent here. If the civics in the area want to be engaged in this working, then engage us. But don't not tell us, lease the space, and then challenge the plan. Help us. I think we can all kind of engage on that too.
All right. Is your light still on, or is it? Okay, very good. So is that all the questions we have? All right. So why don't we open this back up to the public to give a statement? So statements are, I'd like to keep them brief if we can. In theory, they're 2 minutes, but it's fairly small group. So, Mr. Gratch, could you please approach the podium?
Well, thank you. My statement would be I would consider the number of tenants and the success in leasing the property is not forever cast in stone. So it can change in the future and reverse itself as well. But from what I heard today, this was foreseeable, so we don't have a change of circumstance. And further, that we're talking about a capitalized benefit to the developer of $900,000. And I would repeat my question, what are the concrete benefits to the city to award to the developer a windfall, or at least the capitalized sum of $900,000? Thank you.
Thank you very much. 3 years ago, I made comments to, I don't know if it's this board or one of the many hearings that were held on this project, and I did speak about the developer's request to go from 143 spaces to 101 spaces, and now to 50 spaces. But this has been covered, so I won't go into all I was going to say about that, but I was quite convinced at that time that it would be not reasonable to think that someone would want to park 3 blocks away, load your baby, load your groceries, unload and whatnot, walk down and then walk back. But if they say it's happening, who am I to say? I do know that I tried to rent a space earlier this year in Sherman. I don't have 47 cars, I have 1. I couldn't get in when they were redoing our garage. So that may be something you might want to look at. I think that if you approve the request to go down from the 101 spaces, it might be something to think about to charge something for those spaces that they're giving up. Because I presume that the garage or the city built in that revenue into their budget, because there was a commitment made to pay $100,000 for those spaces. And so there's going to be a shortfall in someone's budget, and who picks up shortfalls in our city? I think the taxpayers do. If there's some kind of decrease in revenue from something that was anticipated. And to the other request, which you're not considering this evening, and that's to go from 2 affordable units, 2. And all we read about, we read a lot about in the city of Evanston is noble efforts to try and increase the amount of affordable housing. So to take it from 2 to 1, I think it's unconscionable. And they say they can't rent them. Well, maybe there are organizations that could help them rent, because I'm sure there's a market out there for affordable units. Finally, I worked for a bank for 40 years, and I worked with developers, so I know developers have tactics that they can employ to get their projects done, and I'm not casting aspersions, but last April, I sent a letter to the mayor and to the traffic guy of the roundtable, because the developer had requested the city to close our street to traffic until December 31, and they were going to close it to vehicular and to pedestrian traffic for about 6 months. So we would have to walk around 2.5 blocks to get, anyway, you get it. They closed it, and we couldn't walk down the street. In November, there was a request, a notice back to the residents of our building indicating that there was a miscalculation in planning and that they were requesting an extension of closing the streets from December to May 31. So that's an additional 5 months. And they say due to miscalculation. Now, I find it hard to understand how a major developer with computers and engineers and whatnot could make a miscalculation of 5 months, 5 days, 5 weeks maybe, but not 5 months. So we were inconvenienced. And if you go to the city to ask, can I close the street down for a year, they'd probably say no. But if you ask, can I close it down for 6 months, okay. And then you can come back and plead your case. We made a mistake. Can we get 6 more months? And that happened. So that's just part of what you do, I think, to get projects done, whether it's in Evanston or anywhere else. But promises are very easy to make, and sometimes they're easy to break. So we just have to see if they keep their promises. And it is not, I think, the city's concern as to whether or not a developer can flip his building for a profit. They talked about, the cap rate and so forth, and he went through his numbers. I don't think that we need to guarantee the developer a profit when they flip their properties. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. Just for a clarification, this body does not approve or deny anything. We either recommend approval or recommend approval as modified or recommend that the request be denied to the city council, but we do not make any decisions ourselves. All right, and last is Ms. Rosen. Okay.
Thank you. I guess I would just like to maybe reiterate some of Ed's comments. Thinking from a budgetary standpoint, it sounds like this is planned for this year, potentially having a reduction, but if we, again, have another reduction in the next year and so on and so forth, just that be taken into consideration from a budgeting standpoint. I think we all, both personally and as a business, have to have some forecasting of our revenue stream, and as the city looks at this, to really, take a hard look at it. I know that I was at a lot of the meetings, being on the board of the building next door, and I don't know that it seemed that the parking was as fuzzy as it seemed like it is tonight, with the number of spots that we over cushioned due to the neighborhood. But obviously we weren't party to probably a lot of the conversations that happened outside of meetings or planning. But I guess I would just, wish that, people would take that into consideration. And I certainly understand your concerns about we can say no as an owner. And I think that is, an option for an owner, but that's an individual conscience that an individual has. And I appreciate your comment. And I'm not sure that everyone in the building would be in the same conscience that we want others from outside in our building. We don't have control over those individual thoughts, but really was just an example, again, to know that the city is looking at an apples to apples with numbers. Do we really have parkers? And yes, people can lie. I think we all know that, but just to, bring that to the attention that, we're looking at numbers that are based on an internal mechanism. And it sounds like you guys as commissioners have asked those questions also. So thank you.
All right. Does the petitioner have any questions or clarifications of the issues that were just raised, or the statements? All right. So hearing none, I think we will call that close the public testimony portion of this hearing and proceed to the commission's deliberations. So, again, I would like to open the floor up to questions from the commissioners. Is there any other questions? Commissioner Isaac.
I have a question for staff. I think I joined this commission shortly after this project was initially approved. And I don't think I've seen a project, or at least I'm not recalling a project that had so little parking and built into it and was relying on city lots. I know there have been some projects that have sort of subsidized their parking requirements by using city lots, but I don't think I've seen one that does it to this extent. Are there more projects like this in the city?
Definitely not to this extent, but also we don't really have any other planned developments. I don't think that have been quite so close to various transit stations and bus lines and things of that nature. I do have a chart of different planned developments and the parking that was approved. That doesn't address who has actually leased spaces from the city versus who has their spaces on site. That's just an overview of the amount of parking. So I'm not sure if that would help your point at all. Okay. But this one definitely was one that was kind of outside the box.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? No. All right. give an opportunity for the petitioner to make any closing statements before our deliberation?
Yeah, I would just like to say that, facts are a very stubborn thing, and, we're now dealing with data, and we have the facts, and we should just look at them. We don't need 101 parking spaces, we don't need 80, we don't need 70, we don't really even need 50, but we provided a cushion, and, right now, as I said, we provided data to the city that we needed 47 some time ago. We're now under 40, and those are facts. Anyway, thank you.
All right. Anything that staff would like to say?
I don't believe there's much to add. The DAPR recommendation was for 70. I think some of the rationale there is that we're fairly early in the development of this process, a year in, roughly, and then some of the units just being about that time period or maybe a little less that they've been leased. So the story's a little bit out on it.
That approximates the code required amount. If you take the 70 plus the 12, 13 on site would actually equal it exactly, right?
Correct. So that is the recommendation.
Okay. All right. So, commissioners, what are your thoughts? Do you have any comments, or Commissioner Hallett?
Yeah, I think the TOD concept is a great thing, and I think over the years we've definitely seen parking requirements in cities that have public transportation, like Evanston. The requirement for parking has been reduced, and I think we'll see that. I think that's a trend that's going to continue. And I think you see it nationally. So it's not just Evanston that we're talking about here. I think it's very unfortunate when cities require developers to build additional parking garages, not so great looking parking garages that take other space away from what could be. Instead, you're building a parking garage that in a lot of cases, very many cases, are becoming more and more unused. So I believe the trend. I think that the developer is very lucky in this case that they didn't have to build additional parking spaces. So we have this opportunity to allow them to reduce their actually just reflect their current use. As far as the cost to the city goes, we're returning the parking to the city for the city's use. So the city, if there is such a demand for parking, the city will benefit from that demand. So I just think it's the right move to make. So.
Okay. Commissioner Goddard.
Yes. When this project first came to us 3 years ago, this room was filled with people complaining and predicting this was going to be a complete disaster in their neighborhood. And my understanding was that we made it so that anyone living in this building was not able to get a permit to park on the street. So the fact that there is no one here complaining about people parking on the street is a pretty good indication to me that it's not a problem. I would like to have more numbers on Sherman's space utilization. I'm a little reluctant to offer space in Sherman and Maple without that. And also, I know you've done this in many places, but you say you have a year's history, but you really only have 6 months because people signed up a year ago, but they've only been living in this building for 6 months. So is that enough time to figure out how many cars you're going to need? It's a rhetorical question.
Yeah. Please, if you...
We actually had the building, although we started leasing, taking occupancy in June of 2017, there was a huge pent-up demand for this project, and so we were 50% leased, really well before, probably 60% leased before the end of the summer, almost 70% leased. So people have been leaving here, at least over 70% of the building was living here that long. And we had a huge turnover in this past summer. And so those are all new residents. That's why I think the data is showing that it's actually decreasing in terms of our parking needs from the first tenancy to where we are today. And my prediction is it will decrease even further, because one of the stats I didn't tell you before was that these national trends, you're absolutely 100% correct, and we can't ignore them. But also in our building, we were projecting only 20 to 25% of grad students. We were really targeting grad students by the size of units and the type of amenities we have, et cetera. We have 70% graduate students.
Really?
From North. It's a blowaway number. I've even asked 2 or 3 times, is that true? Is it could be possibly true? And the answer is yes. And so again, our demographic, it's almost self-selecting the type of building we are. If you really need a car every day, you're probably not going to live here. The kind of people who live here, we found out, are people who need their car like once a week. You don't mind walking, 5-7 minutes to get your car if you're only using it once a week. Thank you.
And my last comment is the money issue doesn't sway me. It's not our job to reduce your costs, even though they're pass-through costs. And on the other hand, it's not our job to raise revenue for the city either.
Okay. Commissioner Dubin. Or Terry.
Yeah, whichever you prefer. I think it's a good idea. I think the transit-oriented development, I think nationally there is a trend to have fewer cars. People aren't owning cars, and young people are not necessarily owning cars. I'm happy with the thought of reducing the amount of parking. And again, as Commissioner Goddard said, I don't think it's our place to help raise revenue for the city, nor present you with a windfall. But I also think staff would have to look at the vacancy rates in the Sherman Plaza garage due to the Target being there now, and see if there's an increased demand for parking before we would throw Sherman Plaza into the mix.
Any other comments? So I would kind of like to ask some, I guess maybe a question about is it so one, if we were to reduce this to say the 50 parking spaces, we've got the 2 issues, right? The number of parking spaces. Is there a vehicle is there a way to either, and this is for the commissioners, either to raise it or in the future without petition, or write it in a conditional way, or write an amendment that could graduate the amount of spaces used? I guess that's one. And then I was actually a little intrigued by why we are limiting the location of where these spaces are leased to municipal spaces. I mean, if there's space available in the adjacent condominium building, I'm just curious why we're not sharing everywhere. We're not allowing the parking to fill itself to the proper level wherever the demand asks for it. But that said, I think I'd like to see if anyone has any more comments. If anyone has a motion that they would like to put forth. Oh, yes, we should do the standards, yes. All of that. Let's go back. Thank you for running herd on me.
Okay, as I mentioned before, there are several different sections that we need to look at for standards for this particular adjustment. Since this is an adjustment and not a new development itself, many of these will not be applicable as we aren't making any physical changes to a site or to the building itself. To start, we've got the standards for special uses. And would you like me to go through each one?
Well, why don't
If
we,
they don't
why don't we
apply,
briefly go through it? Because yes, we should go through them all. So one is that special use specifically listed in the zoning ordinance, right? Right. That's really not applicable to the issue at hand.
We've already addressed that.
Is it in keeping with the purposes and policies adopted by the comprehensive general plan and zoning ordinances amended from time to time? I think that is applicable, and is there a consensus? I think that that's probably met. Will it cause a negative cumulative effect on the various special uses of types in the immediate neighborhood or on the city as a whole? Any citing of this? I think Commissioner Halleck, you said one, it reduces the bulk created by unnecessary parking was one of the things. So I think that this is.
I don't know if that's relevant here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So do you have anything that we can cite that would say that this is not going to affect? I mean, the parking. If everyone did this, is the parking adequate within the area, I guess is the question, right? And it seems to be, right? That there are available spaces, all right. Does it not interfere with or diminish the property value in the neighborhood? I think that is clear. It can be adequately served by public facilities not applicable. It does not cause an undue traffic congestion. In fact, it benefits the traffic congestion. It preserves significant historical architectural resources is not applicable. It preserves significant natural and environmental features not applicable. It complies with all the applicable regulations of the district in which it is located and other applicable ordinances, except to the extent that such regulations have been modified through the plan development process or grant of a variation. And I think that would be met, yeah. So what's next?
Next is the standards for a plan development, which is just the one fairly long one.
And basically that says?
It's essentially saying it adheres to all of the standards that are established within the zoning district and our code, and that it would comply with any standards that are set by the city and the commission, and that it basically meets all of the written finding of facts.
Okay. All right. And lastly,
the more lengthy one, but also many of these do not apply. These are the standards and guidelines for plan developments in the D3 district. And generally, these speak to whether or not the use is compatible within the district, if it meets certain guidelines, zoning code.
Right.
The first one that I think actually would apply for this particular one is number 3, and that's whether or not it is compatible with the goals and objectives that are within the comprehensive plan, the downtown plan, and other plans that relate to land use within the city and different structures.
and so that is basically stating that it's to create a vibrant downtown that benefits commercial development, mixed-use development, and I would believe that that would be met. Any objections to that? Okay.
Okay.
All
The
right.
next two speak to landscaping and building of the property.
It's not affected, yeah.
So the next one, section B, also many of these are not applicable. Number 2, I do believe actually is applicable, and that is essentially the location, construction, operation of the parking, any loading areas, which is not applicable, that they're designed to not have any adverse effect on either the property or adjacent uses, and that they do a service essentially to the district.
Additional parking depending on that required. So, we're finding facts that that presented facts that it's meeting the actual demand of the parking requirements as they see it. So number 4, is that also?
Yes, number 4 is the next one that is seemed to be applicable. Essentially, it's that the development will provide. Actually, this may not be.
I don't think it's
Skipped
applicable.
over that one.
Yes.
So we'll skip over that one. Then the next one that would be number 7, which would be the zoning administrator. We can request any additional studies or impact analysis that we see reasonable, or any additional data.
Of the petitioner.
Yes.
All right. So I don't think we're asking for that at this time. So based on the evidence provided and the testimony provided and the standards, does anyone have a motion?
I have a motion.
Yes, Commissioner Isaac.
I move that we recommend the City Council amend Ordinance 19-0-15, Section 4Z, to reduce the number of parking spaces required to be leased from the City of Evanston from 101 to 70.
Period.
Period.
Is there a second with the obvious comment that does not address the location of parking?
I'm happy to amend it to, I forgot about that part,
Okay.
to also include the option by the tenant, who's the applicant, to rent spaces from either the Sherman Avenue garage or the Maple Avenue garage.
As available by, as determined availability by the city, whatever, staff. Okay. So, okay. Is there a second? Anyone? So is it going to fail for not having a second?
I second.
All right, Commissioner Drake. So all right. I think we have a roll call vote. Is that in order?
All right. Commissioner Draper?
Approve.
Commissioner Dubin?
Aye.
Commissioner Goddard?
No.
Commissioner Halleck?
Aye.
Commissioner Isaac?
Aye.
Commissioner Pagotzi? And Chair Lewis?
Aye.
All right, the motion passes.
All right. So that concludes case number whatever it was, and thank you very much. PLD, yep. All right, so the next thing on the agenda is election of a vice chair. So we've been operating without a vice chair since, I don't know, early in the year. So are there any nominations? Commissioner Goddard?
I nominate Peter for vice chairman.
Okay, Commissioner Isaac, is there any seconds?
I second.
All right. Any seconds? Okay. So I have to ask a procedural question. If we should offer this for other nominations, right? If there's other nominations? Yeah. All right. And then it would become a popular vote or not an up and down vote? I mean, I'm serious. I mean, yeah, yeah. Is it a up or down vote, or do we do each one up or down? Are there any other nominations for? Well, I know, yeah. Are there any other nominations?
Not from this side.
Okay. Not hearing any. Why don't we take a vote? Oh, well, first we should ask Commissioner Isaac, would he accept it if
I would accept it with
If.
the one condition that you put on Chairman Ford, that he never miss a meeting.
yeah.
Under those circumstances, yes.
All right. Same one. All right. So let's do a roll call vote again.
All right. Commissioner Draper?
Aye.
Commissioner Dubin? Commissioner Goddard?
Aye.
Commissioner Halleck? Commissioner Pagotzi? And Chair Lewis.
Aye. You're not going to ask Commissioner Isaac?
I don't think it would be appropriate to.
He abstains anyway.
Okay.
I got to abstain, so, last time, so. All right, so at this time, is there any public comment? Okay, because you're the public. All right, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Dubin, second. Yeah, Isaac, all in favor? Aye. Against? No. Meeting is adjourned.